April 7, 1989, 11:03 a.m. Smoke was already pouring from the aft compartments. Emergency lights blinked red inside the pressure hull. The Soviet nuclear submarine K-278 Komsomolets was in free ascent. Struggling to surface after a fire crippled its reactor and propulsion systems deep in the Norwegian Sea. Alarms screamed. The captain ordered an emergency ballast blow. Seconds later, the submarine burst through the surface. But the worst was yet to come. As freezing winds slammed against the exposed crew, distress calls echoed through the fleet. Rescue ships were en route, but time was running out. And on the ocean floor, 1,680 meters below, a new kind of crisis was forming. A crisis that would last decades, involve the US, NATO, and Russian naval intelligence, and turn a sunken submarine into one of the Cold War's most secret battlefields. The Soviet nuclear submarine K-278 Komsomolets was cruising at a depth of 335 meters during its first operational patrol when a fire broke out in the aft engineering compartment. A short circuit ignited insulation material. Flames consumed the area rapidly. Watertight doors slammed shut, but the heat and toxic smoke pushed through ventilation shafts. The crew initiated emergency shutdown of the nuclear reactor, cutting off power. Suddenly, the submarine went dark. Systems failed. The captain ordered emergency surfacing using auxiliary ballast tanks. The entire pressure hull shuddered under the strain. In under 20 minutes, Komsomolets breached the surface. The frigid wind hit like a blade. Air temperatures were sub-zero. Seawater hovered around 2 degrees Celsius. Dozens of crew emerged onto the icy hull, coughing from smoke, some without protective gear. Distress signals were sent. Soviet maritime patrol aircraft circled overhead. A rescue vessel had been dispatched, but it was still hours away. Time was slipping through freezing fingers. Inside, a few attempted to use the submarine's escape capsule. 5 men entered. It malfunctioned. Only one survived the ascent. The rest perished in the failed pod or disappeared below. Around 3:15 p.m., the submarine's hull slipped beneath the waves. The Komsomolets descended into the abyss, 1,680 meters deep, carrying with it 2 nuclear-armed torpedoes and its reactor. Of the 69 crew aboard, 42 would never return. The others floated in life rafts or clung to wreckage, silent and shivering. Rescue ships arrived soon after. A fishing trawler converted into a rescue platform recovered 25 men, but found bodies in the water. The search for survivors gave way to recovery. Debriefings revealed chaos. Equipment failed. Communications were inconsistent. And worst of all, the sinking had created an environmental hazard lying on the seafloor. The Soviet Navy dispatched the research vessel Keldysh, equipped with deep-sea submersibles, to locate the wreck. The Norwegians tracked radiation levels in their own waters anxiously. The disaster had shifted from naval tragedy to geopolitical alarm, but the next discovery would be even more disturbing. 2 weeks after the Komsomolets disappeared into the Norwegian Sea, Soviet deep-sea submersibles located the wreckage. It was intact, mostly. Crushed sections at the stern and bow showed where implosions had occurred, but the central hull still contained the nuclear reactor and 2 torpedoes equipped with plutonium warheads. The seabed at 1,680 meters had become a radioactive time bomb. Pressure from the west mounted immediately. Norway, whose territorial waters bordered the disaster zone, demanded full transparency. Radiation levels in local fisheries were tested daily. Fishing vessels rerouted. NATO surveillance aircraft flew daily missions to monitor Soviet salvage operations. In Moscow, the Ministry of Defense launched Operation Octopus, a covert mission to assess radiation leakage and secure the torpedoes. In late May 1989, the research vessel Keldysh deployed MIR submersibles piloted by elite oceanographers trained during Cold War espionage missions. Cameras scanned the wreck's hull. Muted alarms echoed inside the submersible as radiation meters ticked higher. The torpedoes were still in their launch tubes. A corrosion line was spreading. Even worse, the submarine's titanium hull, once thought to resist oceanic pressure indefinitely, showed signs of material fatigue. Microscopic cracks ran along welded joints. Naval scientists feared the reactor containment chamber might eventually breach. The Soviets kept these findings classified. For years, the wreck was monitored by both Russian and Norwegian authorities. Tiny amounts of plutonium seeped into the surrounding silt. By the mid-1990s, it was clear Leakage had begun, but any attempt to recover the reactor or torpedoes would be technically dangerous and politically explosive. In 1994, a joint expedition recorded isotopic signatures near the wreck site. Media attention reignited international scrutiny. The world had almost forgotten the Komsomolets. Now, its ghost was leaking radiation at the bottom of NATO's northern flank. But the Kremlin had one more reason to worry. Intelligence had picked up movement near the wreck not from their own vessels, but from an unknown underwater vehicle. Autumn 1994, NATO intelligence stations in Norway intercepted anomalous sonar data near the Komsomolets wreck site. A slow-moving object had entered the area at 1,600 meters depth, remained stationary for over an hour, then moved west against the current. It wasn't Russian. The object displayed acoustic signatures inconsistent with Soviet Mir submersibles or any known Russian recovery craft. British analysts proposed a theory. A NATO submersible, possibly American, had breached the exclusion zone to inspect the wreck. Washington denied involvement. Privately, U.S. Navy sources remained silent. That same week, a Norwegian surveillance buoy recorded a second incursion. This time, sonar captured the distinct rhythmic hum of a nuclear propulsion system. Then silence. The signal vanished without trace. Some believed it was the USS Halibut, a specialized American submarine modified for deep-sea reconnaissance. Others suspected a British Trafalgar-class hunter-killer submarine, but no government-acknowledged presence in the area. The Russians, alarmed, deployed a Victor III-class attack submarine to patrol the region. It made a sonar sweep over the wreck site, confirming disturbances in the sediment. Small circular patterns consistent with remotely operated vehicles. They had been there. Someone had touched the wreck. Moscow feared foreign actors might retrieve sensitive components, torpedo arming mechanisms, sonar processors, or even reactor parts. Worse, any such recovery could expose Soviet naval secrets or trigger diplomatic retaliation. An emergency meeting was held at the Northern Fleet Command Center in Severomorsk. Surveillance of the site was escalated. The Russian Navy now considered the wreck an active intelligence asset. Back in Washington, the Pentagon initiated Project Watchtower, a silent observation program using undersea fiber optic listening cables laid across the Norwegian Sea. It wasn't about salvage, it was about monitoring who else might be trying. The wreck was no longer just a grave, it had become a battlefield of espionage, silent, cold, and invisible. But then, something moved again, and this time, it wasn't subtle. March 1995, 4:02 a.m., Russian sonar operators aboard the Victor III-class submarine K-502 detected a submerged contact 3.4 kilometers east of the Komsomolets wreck site. The contact had approached silently, maintaining a depth of 1,650 meters, just 30 meters above the seabed. At that depth, thermocline layers distort sound, but the target's movement was deliberate. It hovered. The K-502 trailed the unknown contact for 7 minutes. Then, without warning, the contact emitted a brief acoustic pulse, similar to an active scan. That's when the Russian crew heard it. A mechanical deployment, followed by turbulence in the water. They recorded the sound of an object, likely a probe, being released. The intruder had just begun an unauthorized descent onto the wreck. The K-502 captain ordered immediate interception. He broke radio silence and relayed the incident to Severomorsk Naval HQ. Russian naval protocol authorized an intimidation maneuver. The K-502 accelerated, approaching within 1,000 meters of the target, then released a countermeasure pattern. False sonar pings, mimicking weapons lock. The unidentified vehicle responded with a burst of reverse thrust and dove sharply. It vanished into the seafloor topography, using deep ridges to evade tracking. For 23 minutes, the Russians hunted in silence. Passive sonar swept the sector, then a faint metallic echo returned. The intruder was heading west again, faster now, climbing toward safer depths. The Russians followed, but the window had closed. Whatever probe or sensor package had been deployed was likely still sitting on the wreck. It wasn't recovered. In Severomorsk, High Command ordered satellite imaging and regional signal monitoring. Naval intelligence suspected that the U.S. Navy, or a NATO ally, had successfully mapped internal features of the wreck or planted a sensor. The strategic risk shifted. The site was no longer just vulnerable, it had been breached. 3 days later, Russian surface ships deployed deep-sea monitoring equipment. They established a permanent acoustic perimeter, a digital minefield. Any future intrusion would trigger automated pings and data beacons. A warning to the world, Russia was watching. But while the Russians were installing their new defenses, a second incursion was already in motion. April 1995. Just 2 weeks after the first breach, a second unidentified contact entered the Komsomolets perimeter. This time, it came from the north, approaching beneath a thermocline layer that masked its acoustic signature. Russian monitoring buoys did not detect it until it was already inside the exclusion zone, 800 meters from the wreck. Unlike the previous contact, this one behaved aggressively. It deployed what appeared to be 2 small autonomous vehicles, drones, which split directions, one moving toward the torpedo bay, the other toward the reactor chamber. Russian sonar teams aboard the Marshal Nedelin, a Udaloy-class destroyer coordinating surface surveillance, initiated alert status. Passive sonar captured faint echoes of robotic arms moving along the hull. They were touching the submarine. Orders from Northern Fleet Command were clear: intercept or disrupt. A Project 1851 deep submergence vehicle was launched from a nearby Russian support ship. It dove fast, tailing the drone nearest the reactor module, but by the time it arrived, the autonomous vehicle had already withdrawn, leaving behind a small device magnetically attached to the hull. The Russian pilot recorded everything through high-resolution cameras. Within minutes, the second drone was spotted leaving the torpedo bay zone, heading north at nearly 5 knots. It rose sharply, passed the thermocline, and vanished. Russian forces recovered the small magnetic device. It contained multiple sensors and a high-gain antenna, likely for long-term data transmission. The implications were clear. Someone had mapped radiation levels, hull stress, maybe even tried to capture internal data through acoustic resonance. It was a clear breach of international maritime conduct. Moscow issued a formal protest through diplomatic channels, but avoided naming a country. NATO responded with silence. Unofficially, Russian analysts believed the second intrusion was carried out by a U.S. Navy undersea reconnaissance drone, possibly a modified Remus or prototype from DARPA's deep surveillance program. Tensions escalated. A classified Russian memo recommended preparing the wreck for explosive denial, rigging demolition charges in case of attempted extraction. The Komsomolets was no longer just a hazard. It had become a target, a flashpoint, and the timing couldn't have been worse, because just as the Russians prepared for a potential recovery denial, NATO was preparing a research expedition of its own, this time fully public. June 1995. In a surprising move, NATO announced a joint Norwegian-American scientific expedition to study deep-sea ecosystems near the Komsomolets wreck. Officially, it was a marine biology mission. Unofficially, Moscow understood the message. NATO was staking a presence near the most politically sensitive submarine grave in modern naval history. Operation Sunlight launched from the Norwegian research vessel GeoSARS, supported by U.S. Navy oceanographic advisors. The expedition brought advanced ROVs, submersible labs, and sensor arrays, all publicly declared, all under civilian scientific command. But 2 U.S. Navy officers remained aboard as liaisons. Russian state media denounced the move. Naval Command in Severomorsk placed 3 submarines on rapid response status. Satellite photos showed increased surface activity around the wreck site. Although Operation Sunlight stayed outside the declared exclusion zone, Russian sonar buoys detected ROVs operating close to the border. The tension below the waves was matched only by the political silence above them. What NATO found wasn't entirely made public, but data leaked from the expedition showed highly detailed sonar maps of the wreck, including corrosion lines near the reactor compartment. Radiation readings confirmed minor leakage, but no catastrophic spread. It also revealed evidence of prior contact, magnetic drag marks, small indentations, and signs of recently disturbed sediment. NATO had proof others had been there, and not just Russians. That revelation was more valuable than any torpedo. Back in Moscow, this triggered an internal debate: protect the wreck indefinitely, or remove the reactor and torpedoes once and for all. Some argued for full recovery. Others warned it would risk international escalation. In August, a top-secret Russian proposal surfaced: use a modified submersible to seal the reactor chamber with a permanent titanium vault. It would turn the Komsomolets into a crypt, Forever silent, but never fully forgotten, the plan was never approved, but the site was upgraded again. More sensors, wider sonar nets, and round-the-clock patrols. The Cold War was over, but below 1,600 meters, its embers still glowed. The Komsomolets never fired a shot in combat, but its death triggered a chain of underwater confrontations more strategic than any surface battle. And yet, in the years that followed, no one ever publicly claimed the deep-sea probes. No nation admitted touching the wreck. No flag was flown. Only the cold pressure of the abyss kept the secrets in place. June 1995. In a surprising move, NATO announced a joint Norwegian-American scientific expedition to study deep-sea ecosystems near the Komsomolets wreck. Officially, it was a marine biology mission. Unofficially, Moscow understood the message. NATO was staking a presence near the most politically sensitive submarine grave in modern naval history. Operation Sunlight launched from the Norwegian research vessel Geopolitical, supported by U.S. Navy oceanographic advisors. The expedition brought advanced ROVs, submersible labs, and sensor arrays, all publicly declared, all under civilian scientific command. But 2 U.S. Navy officers remained aboard as liaisons. Russian state media denounced the move. Naval Command in Severomorsk placed 3 submarines on rapid response status. Satellite photos showed increased surface activity around the wreck site. Although Operation Sunlight stayed outside the declared exclusion zone, Russian sonar buoys detected ROVs operating close to the border. The tension below the waves was matched only by the political silence above them. What NATO found wasn't entirely made public, but data leaked from the expedition showed highly detailed sonar maps of the wreck, including corrosion lines near the reactor compartment. Radiation readings confirmed minor leakage, but no catastrophic spread. It also revealed evidence of prior contact, magnetic drag marks, small indentations, and signs of recently disturbed sediment. NATO had proof others had been there, and not just Russians. That revelation was more valuable than any torpedo. Back in Moscow, this triggered an internal debate: protect the wreck indefinitely, or remove the reactor and torpedoes once and for all. Some argued for full recovery. Others warned it would risk international escalation. In August, a top-secret Russian proposal surfaced: use a modified submersible to seal the reactor chamber with a permanent titanium vault. It would turn the Komsomolets into a crypt, forever silent, but never fully forgotten. The plan was never approved, but the site was upgraded again. More sensors, wider sonar nets, and round-the-clock patrols. The Cold War was over, but below 1,600 meters, its embers still glowed. The Komsomolets never fired a shot in combat, but its death triggered a chain of underwater confrontations more strategic than any surface battle. And yet, in the years that followed, no one ever publicly claimed the deep-sea probes. No nation admitted touching the wreck. No flag was flown. Only the cold pressure of the abyss kept the secrets in place. In the cold, dark depths of the Norwegian Sea, the Komsomolets rests in silence. But its story never ended. It became more than a Soviet tragedy, more than a Cold War artifact. It became a silent flashpoint, an underwater frontier where superpowers tested limits, exchanged warnings, and fought for secrets without firing a single shot. The covert operations, sensor probes, and unacknowledged incursions around the wreck site reflected a new form of naval warfare, not with fleets on the surface, but with submersibles in the abyss, where visibility is zero and denial is plausible. This wasn't about rescue, it was about intelligence dominance, about proving who could reach farther, stay longer, and collect more without getting caught. For Russia, the Komsomolets became a symbol of national pride and vulnerability. For the U.S. and its allies, it was a rare opportunity to examine Soviet naval engineering under real conditions. For the world, it became a quiet but constant reminder that the Cold War had left dangerous legacies resting beneath the waves. Today, the wreck remains monitored, not just for radiation, but for intrusion. Still armed, still radioactive, still dangerous. The tragedy of the Komsomolets showed how quickly a peacetime patrol could become a multi-decade standoff, and how, even in silence, submarines can trigger confrontation. And yet, no one speaks openly about the wreck. No nation claims responsibility for the drones. No formal acknowledgement has ever been made about the probes, the sensors, or the classified operations that occurred there. Only the water remembers. If you believe stories like this matter, and that we must understand modern war before it happens again, subscribe, like, and comment to support the channel.